Okay, so let's continue the next session. So this is Symmetric key primitives, and we have two talks. So the first one is entitled MAC, a MAC for authentication with strict time constraints and limited bandwidth. So the authors are Leuven and Kill, for being Bell and Simon Friedberg. Now is going to give a talk.
Thank you for the introduction. So this is joint work with Florian Böll and Simon Friedberger from NXP Semiconductors, and the work was actually done while I was visiting NXP Semiconductors last summer. So as a motivation, we all know the Internet of Things. It's a network of physical devices, vehicles, home appliances, and they are embedded in embedded devices, electronics, software, sensors and actuators, and they are connected to the Internet. And there are some estimates that in 2020 there should be about 30 billion devices connected to this Internet of Things. And yeah, unfortunately, often security and privacy is completely ignored, and security is lacking. In this talk, I will focus on one of these use cases. So I will talk about the connected car. So recently, a lot of this Internet of Things stuff was also being put into cars. So wireless interfaces connect to the in-vehicle systems of these cars, and they are connected to external networks such as the Internet. Unfortunately, again, often weak connection encryption is used and no authentication at all. And hackers easily can get access to this in-vehicle networks, and as we have seen before, there's also no safety without security. So maybe a short timeline how the connected car was developed. So in the 1990s, there were a little bit of electronics were added to the car, and later on in the 2000s, there was software added to the car, so it became telematics, entertainment, and late in the 2000s there was the connected car, so you could connect your mobile phone, you have internet, you have TVs in your car and stuff like that. And also later there was assisted driving, so when you park your car, you can actually see back, and some cars already park automatically. And in 2020s, what we see with like Uber and a few other car industries, so they now try to develop completely autonomous cars. Maybe one motivation for why it's also a safety relevant issue. So at Black Hat 2015, there was an attack presented on Jeep Cherokee. That one was hacked remotely, and they could exploit some attacks, and they could get full access of the car. And during that process, they were actually getting it off the road, but nothing was harmed. Nobody was harmed so far. You can't say that about the last Uber incident. So it clearly demonstrates also a physical safety risk, and in the process of the case with Jeep Cherokee, there were 1.4 million cars that had to be recalled and updated. So what specifically happened there? So with the Jeep Cherokee, customers could buy a Wi-Fi add-on. So for $40 a month, they could actually have internet in their car. They can then connect their devices, like phones and tablets. And one would think it's a good thing that their Wi-Fi was password protected. But actually, the Wi-Fi password was based on the system time after provisioning from the car. So the Wi-Fi password looked something like this. and it could have been easily guessed. And there was additionally a software vulnerability in the multimedia system of the car that the attackers could exploit. So then a little bit more details about how all the stuff is connected in a car. So in a car there is one major bus, it's called the control area network bus, it's CAN bus, and it connects about 70 electronic control units, also called ECUs. And that ones also include the engine control, transmission, airbags and braking. So if you can take over stuff in there, then you can do nearly everything. And especially in that case, there was this V85 chip, and that one was actually so configured that you can only read it and write it from the campus to isolate the components. So what happened? So the attackers, so they could over the air or over the internet, they could update the firmware, and then they got full control over the car and could do everything they wanted. And how did it work? So over the internet, they connected to the car. They knew the Wi-Fi because it was predictable. They remotely accessed, the remotely accessible servers were vulnerable. They updated the firmware because there was no proper authenticity checks, and the hack could just be fixed by manual updating the software in the car. So they actually had to recall a lot of cars. And one of the important things to take away from here, so for cars, we actually don't really care about security, so for the encryption security, so we don't care if somebody reads what we're sending there, but it's mainly important that there is authenticity, so that we know the stuff is actually sent from the car components and not just from a hacker that accesses the car from over the multimedia system. So what we are proposing is new Mac construction that is especially good for limited bandwidth with strict time requirements. And what we propose is some information recovery with method authentication codes. And we recover some low entropy information by caching some intermediate values and therefore saving the bandwidth. In our proposal, we define a merging function. We introduce therefore the notation of random input indistinguishability, and the proof for a Mac construction that is secure under OFCMA. I will explain that later. And we also show that there's an efficient instance of this merging function, and as a practical application, we could apply that for the campus and in cars. So as an overview, I will first give some of the specification, then go a little bit about our design rationale, give some details about the security proof, something about the security analysis, and then talk a little bit about performance. So for our design strategy, so we were first aiming about using already existing solutions when possible. We start with a high security components and reduce them as far as possible so that we get them efficient. Our goal was to cache intermediate values so that we don't lose security but still improve a lot of the efficiency. And we reduced the bandwidth by recovering some information from the cache values. And one additional stuff was that it should be efficiently implementable in hardware on embedded devices. So how does our construction looks like? We have here at least two PRFs. We have a merging function that combines those again, and we split the message, and especially in campus we have a lot of information that is redundant. So we have a counter that just counts up, and there is a lot of low entropy information. So what we can do is we can split the high entropy information and the low entropy information, in two parts, and you can also have more of these PRFs, but let's focus for two at the moment. And then for the merging function, we have something with this structure, and this pi in the middle is a permutation which is just a few rounds of block cipher. So let's quickly talk about the PRFs. So for the PRFs, we can use any secure block cipher. What we recommend in our paper is that because it's for constrained devices, we should maybe focus on a few lightweight block ciphers like present and prints. Prints is especially good because it's for low latency encryption, and for the PRFs you can use a mode like Symmetric, for example. Then for our merging function, it looks like this, and it's kind of a Davis-Meyer construction, and it has some relaxed security requirements because the inputs to our function here are actually coming from PRFs, so they should be random, and therefore we can relax some of the security requirements. And the goal of this merging function is kind of to diffuse the combination of the inputs from the PRFs, and so that it shouldn't be possible to find the pre-image from the tag, and yeah, you shouldn't also be able to combine them in some sort of way that you can create a new tag. So for this pi function, we recommend to use a few rounds of JASCII. We slightly adapted it, so because JASCII has block size of 128 bits, and we recommend it for present and prints, we have to reduce it to 64 bits. So the words are just 16 bits here, and full diffusion is reached after 3 rounds, and we choose an ARX-based operations for efficiency, and also the rotation constants are chosen so that they are still secure and efficient. So talking a little bit about the design rationale. So as I mentioned before, our goal was to be able to cache some of the intermediate values. And for example, for MAC constructions like CBC MAC, CMAC, OMAC, you can cache intermediate values, but for example here parallelizing is not possible, and for example for CBC MAC, I think all of the others, all of them require at least a complete block cipher call at the end. For BMAC, BMAC is also caching is possible, and also parallel execution is possible, but again we need a complete call to keep block cipher in the end. There's also XORMAC. For that one, again, caching is possible, parallel execution is possible, but we don't need it at the end, but we need at the beginning either at CMAC R, we need a random number, or from CMAC C, we need a counter, so we again have one more of this block cipher cost that we actually try to avoid. And for MergeMac, what we kind of try to do is we again have PRFs up here. We can parallelize them, but for our merging function, we actually don't need the whole block cipher call. We need just a few rounds of a block cipher. So for security proof, for a MAC construction, we actually want to firstly that nobody can recover the key faster than exhaustive search, and secondly, we don't want to have somebody forging the attack without with a success probability higher than just random guessing. And for that, we can define this CMA notion, which stands for existential unforgeability under chosen message attacks, and we use a key setup algorithm that generates a random key. We have a MAC algorithm that just takes a message and then returns a valid tag for that message. and then we have a verify algorithm that takes a message in the tag, and then either returns valid if the tag is correct, or it returns not valid or bottom symbol if the message in the tag doesn't fit together. So, as always, in security proof, what we do, we have we have the make construction on one side, we have a permutation on the other side, and what we want to do is we do some queries to that one, and then at some point we have to choose on which word we are in, and we can define some advantage to see on what word we are in. And so we consider the make secure if there's no adversary that actually can guess our make construction. And as I mentioned before, for our merging function, we have some relaxed security requirements. So for a hash function, so if we choose just a hash function, we have collision resistance, pre-image resistance, and secure second pre-image resistance. But for merge function, we can relax that. So we assume that the PRFs are secure, but an adversary would have to invert our merge function. And it's not just enough to find any pre-image, so you actually have to find the correct pre-image, so that because you also need the message for to forge a message tag. And yeah, to recombine the PRFs, it should be not be possible, because you again have to invert it and then find the correct pre-image. So we did some security proof, and yeah, our advantage is bounded with this, and it's not higher than just random guessing. So coming to the security analysis, we also looked at our merging function and did some detailed security analysis. So we looked at the PRFs for birthday attacks, for forgery by reordering of messages, and for permutation, we looked for a lot of other different attacks. So we looked for middle attacks, state recovery, differential attacks, and so on. And I will go into the details of a few of them. So especially because a few lightweight ciphers just have a block size of 64 bits. There was an attack called Sweet 32 attack that actually showed that for many block ciphers they can be broken with just 2 to the 32 plaintext. So we have to be aware of that, and we kind of have to reduce the amount of plaintext that we have to take before we have to rekey. Another important attack is because in our merging function our first operation is an XOR. It should be possible to just reorder the two outputs and get a valid tag. And to prevent this attack, we have to use independent keys in each of the periods. For merging function, one important thing is state recovery attacks, and yeah, we claim that it shouldn't be possible because so we have a diffusion after 3 rounds, and yeah, it should be enough so that you actually have to guess the whole stuff before you can do a state recovery. We also experimentally checked for internal collisions, and yeah, we concluded that there are no collisions. And we found that there is one fixed point, so because it's an ARX-based one, we have a fixed point when the input is the R0 vector, then the output is the R0 vector. But to achieve that one, then you have to find 2 messages for the PRFs that come to the same PRF output, and because they are keyed with 2 different keys, it shouldn't be possible because they should be uniform. So should not be possible to exploit this fixed point. Then coming to performance, we used the Supercop benchmarking framework. We actually just implemented a few parts of MergeMac and compared it, for example, to Chusky. And we did our benchmarking stuff on an Intel i7 CPU, which is not the recommended platform, but we actually were not interested in the, we were just interested in how it compares to Chusky in like a normal setting. And what we can see is for Chusky, we have the median cycles down here with different message sizes, and for our merging function, because it's just a few rounds, just 3 rounds of Chusky, so we have a median of 38, which makes our merging function about 3 times faster for short messages. And the difference becomes larger for longer messages. And we also did some estimates, so for the worst case, for example, when the entire message fits into one block, then we would need T1, T2 and the merging time, where T1 is the time for one of the PRFs, versus for a normal PRF just T1. So we would have an overhead of 132%, but if we can parallelize both of them, we would just have an overhead of 32%. In the average case, where the message size is at least 2 blocks and we can have parallel execution, then we have a similar execution time than with just one PRF. And in the ideal case, where both of the outputs are cached, and we just have to execute the merge function a few times, we are 3 times faster than with against the simple map. So as a conclusion, so we showed that MergeMac is specifically tailored for constrained environments with limited bandwidth and with requirements of strict time constraints. We introduced the first information recovery with message authentication codes. We showed the efficient instance of our merging function. We have a security proof and did some detailed security analysis. And yeah, as mentioned before, it should be a practical application for securing for authenticated messages on the campus. Thank you.
So any question? Yes, actually I have one. So I thought a bit weird when I heard 2 things. One is you consider using pins as a building block for PRF, and then you can ensure the security or key recovery against like a key size. Because in the prints, like security against key recovery is not up to the key size, it's up to the product of key and data complexity. So, did you consider that? Okay. I think you should answer.
Okay, so no, we actually didn't consider that. So we just looked at a few block ciphers that would be good for 64 bits.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, then let's thank the speaker again. Okay, so the second talk. So the second talk of this session is entitled Kangaroo 12, faster hashing based on ketchup B. The authors are Guido Bertoni, Jon Demon, Michael Peters, Jess Van Asch, Ronnie Funkier, and Bruno Biggie. And Jules gives the talk.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello everyone. So indeed, I would like to talk about Kangaroo 12, which is a hash function, and it's a practical talk. So I would like to, by this talk, what I would like to do is to show that, of course, in cryptography, the design, what is driving the design of a hash function or any primitive is usually security on the one hand and performance on the other hand, and the result is a trade-off between the two. So in this case, Kangaroo 12 is like a new trade-off between security and performance with respect to Ketchak. So this is the outline of my talk. I will describe what Kangaroo 12 is and what it does, and then I will focus on the design choices driven mainly by security and then by performance. So to describe Kangaroo 12, let's start with Shake 128. So Shake 128 is an instance of Ketchak that was standardized by NIST a few years ago. So it uses, first it's an extendable output function, which is kind of generalization of a hash function. So it's a hash function, but whose output size can be chosen by the user, and it's not limited. So you can see an extendable output function as a function that can output an unlimited amount of digest, and the user just truncates at some point. So it uses internally the sponge construction with a capacity of 256 bits in the case of Shake 128, with a security of 128 bits. And then inside the sponge construction, it uses a permutation F. So the sponge construction is the mode to build an extendable output function, a ZOF, from a permutation. In this case, the permutation is a Ketchak F1600 permutation with 24 rounds. Of course, there is some parallelism inside the permutation, but there is no parallelism outside of the permutation. The sponge construction, to compute the sponge function, you need to wait for the output of a permutation to be able to start computing the next instance of permutation. So Kangaroo 12 can be described starting from Shake 128, and so it's still an extendable output function. You can still have a type of any size. What changes is that we take the sponge construction and put on top of the sponge construction the tree hash mode. So it's described with this figures. Yeah. So the input is divided into chunks of 8 kilobytes. These are the blue rectangles there. And these chunks will be hashed independently. Then the hashes will be put together in the root node of the tree, and then they will be hashed again, and the result will be the result of Kangaroo 12. So it gives us some parallelism that we didn't have before. In the sponge construction, so the sponge construction is represented now with these arrows. Inside the sponge construction, it's the same permutation as Shake 128, except that we reduce the number of rounds from 24 to 8. Also, I should mention that the tree hash mode uses something we call Sakura coding. So all the gray blocks there are a few bits that provide domain separation on all the nodes, so that there is no ambiguity in the input given to the sponge functions there, so that there is no clash of inputs, so there is no ambiguity in what we are hashing. It also uses what we call kangaroo hopping. So kangaroo hopping is the fact that the first chunk here is hashed together in the root node, together with the chaining values of the other nodes. So that's kangaroo hopping, and kangaroo takes childs with them. And yeah, this funny name kangaroo hopping comes from the combination of Kangaroo 12, sorry, comes from the combination of kangaroo hopping and the fact that the computation uses 12 rounds. Easy to win the title. So that's basically it for the description of Kangaroo 12. So let's first discuss some security aspects of Kangaroo 12. So let me start by saying that we target 128 bits of security. That's really the idea of Kangaroo 12. Technically, we do what we call a flat sponge claim. So flat sponge claim, I'm not going to describe it now, I'm just going to say that the idea is to compare the output of the function with that of the random oracle, and to say that any attacks that would be the advantage in, let's say, distinguishing this random oracle, this function from a random oracle, there shouldn't be no attacks with a budget less than 2 to the power 128 operations in time. So basically this includes all the known attacks. Of course, collision resistance, pre-image and second pre-image resistance are included in this claim. The output should not be correlated to the input, and there should not be length extensions. So these are some examples of what it covers. It also covers some variants of those attacks in case there are multi-target variants of those attacks. For instance, a multi-target pre-image attack would mean there are different values for the pre-image, for the image, and the attacker has to find at least one of them. But with this flat sponge claim, we claim there is no degradation of the security under multi-target attacks, except of course if the number of targets is above, again, 2 to the power 120. Okay, so that's a pretty strong notion of 128 bits of security. But what about 256 bits of security? So some instances, some schemes provide such a high level of security, and of course we know that 2 to the power 256 is a much higher number than 2 to the power 128. Nevertheless, from a practical point of view, yeah, maybe it's not much of a difference if you see that 2 to the power 128 is a bound on the budget of the adversary, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't see in the foreseeable future an attacker with a larger budget. But nevertheless, if a higher security level is required, at least to match the security level of other schemes within a protocol, then we have a variant called superiority 14. The difference is the capacity now is 512 bits of the capacity for 256 bits of security, and the number of rounds is 14 instead of 12. Okay, so often the symmetric cryptographic schemes are divided into two parts. First, a mode or a construction, and a primitive. In our case, the mode or the construction it's the sponge construction and the tree hash mode on top of it, and the primitive is a permutation. So for the mode or construction, we can have some security proofs, provable security field of symmetric crypto, and this tells us that if there is a weakness, it's not in the mode. If there is a weakness, it should come from the underlying primitive. That's what the proof says, because the proof will map the primitive to some ideal version. So the scope of the cryptanalysis should be focused on the primitive, and that's the benefit of having such proof, that it reduces somehow the scope of the cryptanalysis, even if the primitive has to be seen within the mode, but nevertheless, we have to look at the round function and everything that's happening inside the communication. In our case, so in the case of Kangaroo 12, the generic security is covered by these three papers, so the indifferentiability proof of the sponge construction, and then we have some sufficient conditions to be able to say that a tree hash mode is sound, is indifferentiable from a random oracle, and we actually use Sakura coding to have those conditions fulfilled and to be sure that the mode is indifferentiable. So everything that comes on top of the permutation is actually shown to be sound, to be secure. Okay, now if we go to the primitive, of course there are no security proofs available, so the only way to have some trust in the security of the primitive is first to have some design rationale that is made publicly available if possible, and to have cryptanalysis on the primitive, and preferably third-party cryptanalysis, and even more preferably a lot of third-party cryptanalysis. But cryptanalysis doesn't come for free. It means it takes time, it takes resources, it takes talent. It's done mainly by our community. So when designing Kangaroo 12, we decided not to build a completely new primitive, but to say, okay, we have some capital, which is the fact that Ketchup was published 10 years ago, then there's been a lot of cryptanalysis done on it, so let's just tweak the number of rounds, let's just change the number of rounds, so that we can reuse these existing cryptanalysis, and let's not make a tweak on the round function which would invalidate this cryptanalysis. So actually the cryptanalysis that has been done on Ketchup so far is directly applicable to Canary. Okay, so let's take a look at the status of what this cryptanalysis says for the moment. So at this point, as of today, the best collision attack on SHAKE128 or Kangaroo 12 goes up to 5 rounds. And that was shown at Crypto last year by Leuven and authors. They also showed an attack, a collision attack on 6 rounds, but that's for a reduced capacity, 160 bits only, which is not the case for SHAKE128 or Kangaroo 12. As far as pre-image attacks are concerned, I don't remember the figures exactly, but I think that it's 3 or 4 rounds. Besides the classical resistance criteria, we could have some distinguishers on the Ketchup response function, and here I'm not talking about zero-sum distinguishers on the permutation that do not extend to the sponge construction. I'm really talking about distinguishers on the sponge function as a whole. When it comes to practical time, the best distinguisher so far is on 7 rounds by one Eurocrypt last year. And if you can go up to 2 to the power 128 time, then there's an attack distinguisher on 8 rounds by Dinour and co-authors at Eurocrypt 3 years ago. And what this attack does is a stream prediction, so you have a lot of key stream, you have 2 to the power 128 blocks of key stream, and then you can predict the next one. So it's rather academic in use, but it exists, so we have distinguishers up to 8 rounds. So even with 12 rounds, that's still comfortable safety margin, I would say. And you can have a look at the cryptanalysis that has been done on Ketchup. There are many papers. If the number of papers on cryptanalysis have been given a scheme isometric, then I think Ketchup does pretty well in that area. Okay, so that's for the speed. That's for the security, sorry, and of course reducing the number of rounds from 24 to 12 already has a consequence on the speed. It goes at least twice faster, but what else can we say? First, a general comment about this trade-off between speed and security. Another thing that is also useful in practice is when making performance decisions, design decisions related to performance, is trying to address both smaller processors and larger processors. And something general. A way to do this is to define different variants of the same primitive, but with varying sizes. For instance, SHA-2 does that. SHA-256 uses 32-bit words and SHA-512 64-bit words, but that can lead to some mismatches. What I mean by that is that SHA-256 on a 64-bit platform will make a suboptimal use of the resources, and SHA-512 on a 32-bit platform will be hard to implement, mainly due to the 64-bit rotations. In the case of Ketchup, we also did something like this. For instance, we have the Ketchup F800 variant of the computation, which uses 32-bit words. But the difference here is that we don't make use of modular additions, which means that there's a trick called bit interleaving that allows us to map one 64-bit rotation into 1 or 2 rotation on 32-bit words. So everything in Ketchup F1600 can be expressed as operation on words of 32 bits. So we don't have this mismatch. We can really express Ketchup F1600 as operation on 32 bit. So for Kangaroo 12, we decided for this reason to stick to Ketchup F1600. A trend now that we can see is, of course, the frequency of the processors seems to reach some kind of saturation. It has been the case for many years. But what's growing is the number of cores on the same chip, and also the size of the SIMD units, so the single instruction multiple data units. And so There was SSE and so on with 128 bits. There's been AVX2 with 256 bits, and now there's AVX512 with 512 bits of SIMD registers. So it would be nice if we could exploit this parallelism, and of course we do that by having a 3-hash mode to be able to exploit as much parallelism as possible. But to remain efficient at the low end, one decision was to take a simple tree structure, which is just a one-level tree, to reduce the memory usage, and also kangaroo hopping. So what kangaroo hopping does, the benefit of kangaroo hopping is not only for the low end, but also for short messages. Let's assume first we don't make use of kangaroo hopping, so we have our one-level tree, the first chunk, which is first hash here, and then the chaining value goes into the root, and the root is hashed again. So it means 2 calls to the underlying hash function, and if the message is short, that's 2 calls to the permutation. With kangaroo hopping, since the first chunk is in the root already anyway, it means only 1 call to the underlying sponge function, so 1 call to the permutation if the message is really short. Yeah, so that's the decision behind this. So concretely, what is the speed of kangaroo 12? So these are speed numbers on different BC platforms, so the Haswell architecture, Skylake. These two use AVX2 with 256 bits of SIMD instructions, and Skylake X with the new AVX512 instructions. So all these figures are for a single core, so we don't exploit parallelism due to multiple cores, but only parallelism due to SIMD units. If the input is short, namely below 8 kilobytes, then we have these performance figures, so between 2 and 3.66 cycles per byte. And when the input is long enough to be able to exploit the parallelism of our 3-hash mode, then these figures, the speed increases, and these cycles per byte go lower, so 1 point something for the AVX2 versions, and even down to 0.55 cycles per byte for AVX512. So that's great. If these numbers don't mean much to you, then maybe let's have a look at other functions. So we compare kangaroo 12 with 2 instances of Ketchak, so shaped 128 from FIPS 202 that I mentioned. Also, parallel hash is a variant defined by NIST in SP 800-185, which is again a 3-hash mode on top of shape 128. The 2 SHA-2 instances and then the Blake 2 instances. And you can see that kangaroo 12 with 1.22, so it's Skylake, with 122 cycles per byte compares favorably to the other functions, and even kangaroo 12 with a short input size, let's say, compares favorably to the non-parallel instances of the different functions. So that's AVX2. Now the trend is for higher, larger SIMD instruction sets, so let's see what the future brings with AVX512. So yeah, these are the numbers. Again, kangaroo 12 compares favorably to the other functions. I should mention that kangaroo 12 and the Ketchak instances were optimized for this instruction set. For the others, I don't know, we just took the available implementations. So, but what I would like to highlight more specifically in this slide is the difference between the two. So we can really see that from AVX2 to AVX512, in the case of the instances where parallelism is taken in, is exploited, there is at least a factor of 2, because simply the SIMD registers are twice wider, and also because the instances that I mentioned here, and kangaroo 12 in particular, has not a limited degree of parallelism. So it means that as long as the input size is long enough, you can exploit any parallelism basically. Another thing that you can see from these figures is that the ratio between AVX2 and AVX512 is larger than 2. And this effect can also be seen on the serial instances. So for instance, kangaroo 12 for short messages go from 289 to 7 cycles per byte. And the reason for this is that in addition to having larger SIMD registers, AVX512 also provides new instructions that are really useful and fit the needs of the catch-background function. One is the rotation, the 64-bit rotations that can be done in parallel. The previous instruction set only had shifts, so one rotation would take 3 instructions, one shift in one direction, and a shift in another direction, and then so. So that reduces 3 instructions to 1. And also another instruction that is very useful is a very general Boolean bitwise operation on 3 inputs. So you can specify any operation on 3 inputs and apply it to the registers directly in one instruction. So many XORs can be simplified. You can do 2 XORs in one instruction, and the chi function does XOR and not is also done in one instruction instead of for 3. So that's really useful, and that explains the gap between these two methods. And I think this concludes my talk basically. So some pointers if you are interested. So there are some implementations available. Our implementation in Ketchup web package includes an optimized C implementation and the reference code in Python, and then there are some other implementation in different languages. And Benoit has drafted an RFC draft. Thank you very much.
So any question? Okay, so one question. So how should the users determine to choose standard Ketchup or Kangaroo 12? What property is the most important for those two?
Well, I will first not answer the question and say that by design we made only one function, Kangaroo 12, there is no parameter, so this limits the choice. Now to answer your question, I think it depends on the needs of the user. If the user needs to have the NIST stamp, of course they should go for NIST. If they want to have speed, they should go for Kangaroo 12. If they want to have a really huge safety margin, they could also stick to the NIST instances. So it's not up to us to decide. I think it's up to the user.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Okay, then let's thank the speaker and all the speakers in the session.